why the hell are you doing that? That doesn't make sense. And they're doing it in a caring way. They're doing it in a way that they're sincere. And that's what we all need. Because if you own the business and you're the CEO and you don't have anybody calling you out, oh my God. You know, we all need people calling us out.
Welcome to Confessions of a Vistage Chair. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. We have real, behind-the-scenes conversations with Vistage Chairs who share honest stories and practical insights on leadership growth, peer advisory groups, and what actually happens in Vistage meetings. Let's pull back the curtain. Rick, there's a bunch of stuff here. One, I'm super excited to have this conversation. And one of the reasons is, so my first chair, I started in Vistage like 9 years ago. My first chair, I got very lucky. It was Ed Robinson.
Oh,
and
fabulous.
I was living in San Diego. My company was headquartered in Baltimore. And I texted one of my buddies that I grew up with. He started tinting cars when he was 15 in his parents' garage.
Yeah.
He's grown it to this huge thing. And I was like, hey, do you know any like groups I can join? And he's like, I'm in this group. His name's Ed Robinson. I'll introduce you. So I was very lucky in that sense. When Alana and I partnered, it's like 2 years ago now. The first thing I said is, you need to join a Vistage group. And so the experience that Alana is having right now is the same experience that I had 9 years ago. So one, thank you for coming on the show. And two, this is near and dear because of your relationship with Alana.
Well, Ed's a great chair, so you started off on the right foot. And Alana's been a great member. She's very active in our Trusted Advisors group, and she's been a real asset and a lot of energy there. So we're thankful to have her.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's jump into your story.
Sure.
There's a lot of stuff here, and really what I'd love to get to is like your journey to becoming a Vistage chair. And when I was going through the notes and I was going through your background, what struck me is like your background is all about people. It's about organizational architecture, culture change, things like, and you've got a vast experience in that. What was that journey like? Were you intentional getting out of college? You're like, I want to do people stuff, or did you just kind of fall into it?
A little bit of both. I just kind of followed my interest, and it started in college when I was like half the kids, right? We're all pre-med, and I spent some time at Harrisburg Hospital in the dialysis unit, and I was a diligent student, wondering why juvenile diabetes caused kidney failure and so forth. And the people I was working with were a man and wife couple, husband and wife, who were both nurses and had been doing it since kidney dialysis since 1958. And they would say, well, this person will make it, this one won't. And I said, well, what's the scientific reasons for that? And they said, well, it's their will. They just don't have what it's going to take. And so that spun me on my head, being a young science student. And I went back to school, Gettysburg College, and created a special major called the Effective Values on Behavior. And what do you do with that? Well, you go to graduate school. And so I continued my interest in studies in this notion of behaviors and what drives our behaviors. And it led over to organizational ethics, what drives organizational behavior. And so I pursued different programs in organizational ethics, chose to go to Yale, and had a great opportunity there with some leading thinkers that were helping corporations to create mission, vision, value statements. And at the time, there was Tylenol crisis, and the General Johnson's credo, the J&J credo, was one well-known value statement, which caused them to pull Tylenol off the shelves back in the 80s. And then Hewlett and Packard had created the HP way. So I was working with a CEO as a grad student, paper company in Stamford, Connecticut, and they were creating the Champion Way, which was a value statement, and then the Champion Way in action. which were the behaviors they expected of employees. So I was a student and then consultant to this, and church down on Wall Street, Trinity Church, had an outreach ministry. Trinity's actually a very large real estate holder in Manhattan, and the wealthiest church in the world. And so they had a lot of outreach ministries, and one was with the business community, business and academia, around corporate responsibilities and essentially creating value statements. So I landed there and did that for a few years, and then that paper company CEO said, "When are you going to get a real job, Rick?" "When you offer me one." And I touche. So there, after a couple of years consulting in that space, I went back to that paper company and was there for 20 years. And incredibly progressive CEO, longest serving CEO in the Fortune 500, Fortune 100 at the time.
Wow.
And so we built high performing work systems at Champion over about a 10, 15-year period, and had the opportunity to work with some incredible people, mentors of mine from academia primarily, some consultants. Really enjoyed it. We were then about to become the largest in the world with a Finnish-Swedish merger, and the shall I say, the Darth Vader of the industry, although I have good friends there, International Paper came along and bought us out, and they were the low cost producer. We were the high margin producer. So very, very different philosophies, very different operating systems. And so most of us chose not to go with IP. And that brought me over to back to consulting in New York with Delta Consulting. Great opportunity, again, working with major corporations around organization design and development, a component of which is your corporate values and culture. And again, a couple of years of intensive training, really kind of like, they're paying me to learn this? You're kidding. And then 9/11. And 9/11 wiped out the consulting industry. Only partners were left after 9 months by May of 2002. And but they helped us to land with clients. And so I was with a health system, a Blunt Square health system, was looking for someone with my background and expertise. They had just merged 4 companies and were looking at a lot of cultural integration, organization integration. Healthcare was, I thought manufacturing was behind the times. Healthcare was 30 years behind the times, and all the people systems, human resources, didn't even have performance reviews.
Wow.
And so we introduced all of that, had a great run there for about 15 years. And CEO said, "Rick, you know, we need to restructure the company given this mandate of value-based care. I would like you to help lead that," which I said, "Great, I know a guy," rather than a big consulting firm. And so we had our external guru and old friend and mentor, Stu Winby. And so Stu came in, and my team and I worked with Stu, and we worked with the senior team to restructure, and board loved it, and we implemented it, moved to a matrix kind of an organization. And in the midst of that, Stu said, "Isn't this fun?" And I go, "Yes, it's a lot of fun." And he said, "Well, why don't we start a company?" And so we created Spring Network, a little consulting group in Palo Alto, and brought in very senior people, very experienced senior consultants. And we had a blast. So for about 8, 9 years, we redesigned and restructured health systems all around the country. And then I had a couple of years when I was dealing with stage 4 cancer, which was not fun, took me out. And it was really after that, when I was recovering from those 2 years, that I said, "What's next?" And a good friend of mine had become a Vistage Chair. I had looked at it, but we got busy again, and he said, "Yeah, it's really exciting. Take a look." So that was back in 2001. And so in '01, I went to Vistage Academy and became a chair. We launched in July of 2021. So it's 5 years, coming up on 5 years. Uh, we've got a great practice with some great folks, and and it's really a it's an opportunity to bring all that I've done, all that I've learned in terms of strategic work to organization design and structure. The flip side of that coin is leadership and leadership behaviors. And those are oftentimes the issues people are really wrestling with in Vistage. It's sure we have financial issues, and I refer them to a trusted advisor for that, and we can get good counsel on your numbers. But it's really the people and organizational issues that stall the scaling, that really get in the way of a company being able to grow. And so it's been a blast. So that's the journey. It's kind of a long-winded journey, but
We're going to go deep into, because some of those areas are fascinating. I want to start off with congratulations for getting through the cancer, and
oh,
there's kind of so many like full circle things in here. Like you started off with this idea of will, and then you ended with this idea of like, I beat it. And so one, I think that speaks a lot to your own will.
yeah,
And then also the full circle of like, you started in healthcare, and then you wound up getting back into healthcare through organizational redesign, and how behind they were. So
yes,
incredible. Let's go back to, you were talking about the Champions Way and the HP Way.
yeah,
And you were talking about this idea that Tylenol, this is when they found out that there was things in the Tylenol that was killing people.
right.
And they,
So
okay.
Jim Burke was the CEO, and he made what at the time was a very bold decision, and he pulled every bottle of Tylenol off every shelf in the country.
Yeah. So looking at that and getting back to, these statements, and then a list of core behaviors, like the opposite end of the spectrum of that is probably Enron, where Enron had core values. It was right there, integrity. Like they had similar
Right.
architecture, I guess you would say, in place, but one person decided to follow it, and the other, it didn't. It sounded like it was just painted on the walls. What, like, through your studies and your journeys, like what's the difference there? Because a lot of organizations have core values and they still do the wrong thing, and then there's ones that just rise above on the
Yeah.
right occasions.
Yeah. I do believe it is leadership. It is the commitment from the top that we're very serious about this, that these are expectations, and they're constantly reinforced. When we rolled out the champion and way and the champion way in action, again, I was a student working with them and learning a lot, but I was with the CEO going to every pulp and paper mill in the country. We would clear out the warehouse. We'd be there for 3 shifts. People came in 30 minutes early, and for 30 minutes, they were going to hear the CEO of the company, who they'd never even met, a $9-10 billion company, talk about this stuff and why it's important, and give real life examples of what he meant. And so, one behavior I'll never forget was, we live by the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we had floods and torrential rains, and our holding ponds overflowed and went into the Tennessee River, that was unacceptable, and people lost bonuses that year because don't care what the reason is. You didn't follow the spirit of the law, and so actions are very clear. And it was a tough business. These are tough people. We used a lot of 4-letter words, and yet the integrity in that organization was beyond. If something was said, that was it. You could take that to the bank. And I've worked with other organizations that had very wonderful missions and lofty goals, and there was a lot of hypocrisy. So it starts with the top, and it means following through. Um, when we had performance reviews, you looked at your objectives, you looked at your personal objectives, and then you looked at whether have you followed through with the values of the organization. So every year, sometimes more than once a year, those were conversations we had. When we hired people, um, people had to, for the most part, be aligned with those values. Someone might be partially aligned with one or two, or neutral on one. But if they're misaligned with any of our values, they weren't hired. And it, it takes years. It takes years to make that, to institutionalize that, and probably months to undo it. But we spent, and again, because of that CEO, we spent decades creating that kind of a culture, and that's what they did at J&J and continued to do, and that's what they, Hewlett and Packard did at HP. So it's really institutionalizing what we stand for.
And you have so much experience coming into organizations and helping them think through this. And you talked about like this is something that takes years. It reminds me of like, trust is built in drops and lost in buckets is kind of the same way that I look at culture as well. And like just one anecdote on your story, by the way, I've been in the Navy for the last 25 years. There's 3 core values: honor, courage, commitment. And I think like the simplicity of it is, everybody's like, I need 10 core values. And it's like, you can get the less, the better on this.
Right. You gotta remember them.
Yeah. Remember. And then the other thing, so we had this sailor's creed, and I remember, I was a young ensign on, just checked on board the ship and everything else. And like, I expected that once I was in the fleet, some of these things kind of went to the wayside and we weren't like, practicing the sailor's creed anymore. And we literally stood on the flight deck. The CO came out and he's like, repeat after me. And he's one of the only COs that I've ever been with that's done that. And a lot of people there, a lot of young people, and they're just like, oh God, like what is the sailor's creed? What am I in boot camp again? But those are like, now looking back, are like the memories that stick out to me, where like culture was being reinforced, and it wasn't dumb or just to do. It was impactful.
I was never in the military, but I've been overwhelmed at the depth and the commitment to these kinds of things that I've seen in the military, and to developing leaders. Yeah. It's second to none, and it's for real. And it takes a long time to instill that, but you're articulating the value, and it's not by coincidence that CEO was a Marine, and
interesting,
implemented much of what he learned in the military.
It all makes sense now. And I used to look, so my first company bankrupted, and the interesting thing is, I was mid 20s, and I was going through something called Seaman to Admiral. So I'd been enlisted for about 8 years at that point. And then the Navy was putting me through 3 years of college and then an RTC program that ultimately led to a commissioning in all of this. But the whole thing, like it doesn't surprise me with like that came from a Marine. In the early days, I would look at this and I had the company and I was like, no, like what the military does, bureaucracy, and like what I'm going to do is like start up and create a culture and things like that. And it's so interesting, like how much actually translates, and also interesting how long it took me to understand that like that was like the foundation of right. How everything moved. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Question for you on the, because you've got a lot of experience of bringing this into organizations, and you talked a little bit about like this takes years. Were there ever organizations that you walked into and they already had core values, but they were bringing you in to help think through like what that meant or next steps?
Oh, absolutely. And within our Vistage group, with our chief executive groups, we spend a good chunk of time on that. And so I think that's a very real live thing right now, with what I've got 30 CEOs who are wrestling with this, and it doesn't stop. We just had a wonderful Vistage speaker come in around strategy, Tim Fulton, And, you know, core to having a strategic plan is being very clear about your mission, your vision, and your values. And we spent time just 2 weeks ago articulating those and then saying, what are you doing to implement them? And so just as you're implementing actions around targeting a market with a new product and achieving a certain level of results, what are you doing to institutionalize these values? And so that's a very real conversation. And I think the connection was made between why have those things and results and performance. And it allows you to create a coherent organization. It allows you to align people. It allows you to have trust and understanding amongst one another as a group of employees or an executive leadership team that gets you off the dime to focus on achieving those results. And so it is instrumental part. And I think, the best companies have shown that. And, the ones who violate it and run, have also demonstrated that.
And what are like, for CEOs out there, there's always business problems. There's always business problems. And it's almost like these every time there's a business problem, there's a business problem in sales. Oh, it's the sales team. There's a business problem in expenses. Oh, there's the operations team, or maybe it's, cost of goods sold or something like that. And like what I found is some of these signals go far beyond just what you're seeing at the surface level. Like when you're working with CEOs and you're hearing them talk through their current issues and what they're thinking about and things like that. What are some things that you're listening for where you're like, that's actually not a sales problem. That's actually not an operations problem. Like that's a culture leadership. How can CEOs like identify that?
Yeah. Let me answer that with the first conversation I have with a new member. And we talk about we talk about growth and what does it mean to grow your business, and from three perspectives: growing your top line revenue, growing your organization and people so that you can scale to meet those target numbers, and then personally learning and growing. And having worked in Fortune 100, Fortune 500 most of my career, I've worked with $3 billion and $30 billion CEOs. I've been their executive coach. And the difference I found between them is minimal. They have very comparable boards of directors, probably serving on each other's boards. They have equally competent C-suite, all the best schools. They have all the systems and processes in place. The $30 billion company has a few more layers and obviously a lot more people. But when you look at the very top of the pyramid, they're very similar. The difference between a $3 million and a $30 million and a $300 million business is light years. And so what I've enjoyed is coming in and working with businesses, as we say in Vistage, from $1 million to $1 billion on that journey. And, that journey involves constant growth, right? Marketing and sales, you got to keep the revenue up. But that's typically not where people hit the glass ceiling. Where they hit the glass ceiling is in terms of their organization capability, taking that person who's been with you from day one, who you love dearly, and recognizing they're a great, $8 million VP of whatever, but I don't think they're a $40 million VP. And what do you do about that? And is there still a role for that person? And do I need to bring someone else in who has more capability? Those are the hard decisions. And, I'm sure you've seen it in Vistage as well. It's the CEOs who make those hard decisions quickly, treat people with a lot of respect. Sometimes, ideally, they're able to hang on to those folks and make a valuable contribution, but they're not of the caliber or experience level or strategic thinking to grow the business to 30 million or 300 million. And so that second area of growth is critical. ideally, you can develop those people, and we have programs to do that. But you've got to face that organizational capability. And then the third, and probably the bigger area of the biggest obstacle to growth, is the CEO. And I've had multiple CEOs where I've had the conversation, it's okay to own the business and hire a CEO. Bill Gates did it. But clearly you love being the chief technology officer, or clearly you love being the chief operations officer, or you love being the chief business development officer. And that's okay. But somebody's got to run the business. Yep. And of course, they look at you like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I say, you're not running the business. And it's okay. But you love doing this, so you got to make a decision. You're going to be the chief technology officer, or you're going to be the CEO. And I've had 3 or 4 of my members go hire a CEO. And so I think that third area of growth, of what does it mean, and you've done startups. I mean, to go from startup to I can breathe is a huge, huge leap. And then from that, $3 to $8 million range, take that next jump where it can actually start hiring, some expensive, really capable people at that $10 to $15 range, and then $1 million area. And then as you grow the business, so it's growing the organization as you're personally learning and growing. So we're constantly saying, and you've heard it many times, how do I spend less time in the business so I can spend more time on the business? So now I'm circling back to your question. And one of the things that I do to look for the alignment and connections that you're speaking of, is it really just a sales problem? Is it just an operations problem? I like to talk about a fellow up at Harvard. His name's Heifetz, and he has this analogy of going to the balcony. So when folks say, Rick, what's this executive coaching all about? What I like to talk about is it's you and I together going from the dance floor to the balcony to have a conversation as we both sit there and watch you dance on the floor. Sometimes we go to the second balcony and we're going to have a conversation as we both sit and watch you not only dance, but how you're interacting with the other people around you. And then we'll go to the third balcony. And now we're having a conversation. We can see the whole ballroom. The music's live. I thought it was piped in. But at that third level, you're seeing the whole system, the global economy, the market, the competition. And at the third balcony, now you can start to see patterns. And it's the third balcony, in my mind, where people are starting to really think strategically and starting to look at an organization and their problems, not in a narrow silo, but holistically, in a way that they're seeing the integration and alignment across all the aspects of the company. And we all know it's a living spider web, and you get a little tug over here and you think it's a sales problem, and the reality is your IT system's messed up. Or you pull it over here and you think it's an IT problem, and so forth. So it's really that a lot of what I'm doing as a Vistage Chair is working with folks to constantly go to that next level of perspective. And at that next level of perspective, look for patterns, look for integration, look for alignment, and then say, now, do I have the foundation, the systems and structures in place to be able to achieve that stuff? And that's our conversation, and that continues to move the ball.
So many interesting tidbits in there, and one of the stories, like I've experienced that firsthand with my VP of operations. So at Hunt to Killer, had a VP of operations. We were probably like a $2-3 million company. He was our 4th hire. And then 5 years later, he was inbound supply chain manager, I think was that, or maybe it was supply chain sourcing. And he was a great example of somebody that was able to, as we grew very, very fast, he was able to kind of navigate into different positions. And like 2 things kind of have to be true there. Like, one, they need the capability. They need to be able to either learn it or open-minded to train to that. And the other thing that I have found, and this is, that's probably one of maybe 100 examples where it went right instead of going wrong.
Right.
because there also has to be this humility aspect to that, to be able to navigate kind of inside of the organization. What's your philosophy there? Because you talked about like developing and training folks up. Like, if someone in EOS land, it's get it one, it has the capacity to execute on whatever that is. Like, do you think that that's enough? Meaning that, like, if someone's in a role, like, can you train them if they want it and they're like almost there? Like, can you train them to stay in that, or is there like signs? It's like, hey, we're gonna have to move you somewhere else.
All right, quick break, friends. Do you find it impossible to hire and retain top sales talent? Or worse, are you paying insane recruiter fees who are all using outdated hiring processes? Yeah, I was too. At Hunt to Killer, we were spending hundreds of thousands on recruiter agency fees. And after I sold that company in 2025, I started Talent Harbor. And the whole vision here was to make sales recruiting accessible to small and medium-sized businesses, because the organizations that can hire and retain world-class people are the ones that ultimately win. Most organizations rely on things like ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn, and they get hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes. But we find that the best salespeople are already perfectly placed somewhere else. And that's why our approach is to go after them. And we do that through a business model called recruiting as a service. We do not charge commissions. We do not have success fees. We don't have contracts. We don't have long-term engagements. And we become an extension of your team as expert sales recruiters. If you're tired of the same old recruiters and want to actually grow your sales team, check us out at talentharbor.com. That's Talent Harbor, TalentHarbor.com. Let's get your next sales superstar hired.
The answer is yes. You can do both. And I think what's critical for leaders is to know when you've reached the limit with someone. I think we all have, our brains all work differently, and we all have certain capabilities. And one of our Vistage speakers, his last name Schminke, and he talks about strategic thinking. And he's done some research on this up at Hopkins. And it's, if I remember him correctly, what he said is that not everyone's mind thinks strategically. Not everyone, in my language, is able to go to that third balcony, see the whole, and see patterns. I think sometimes people can go to the third balcony and they're looking around, but are they really able to see patterns? And so I think our brains work differently. And he said it has nothing to do with intelligence. I mean, you can take savants, and sometimes they're not good strategic thinkers. They're extraordinarily good at people going down into detail and figuring out, increasingly focused thinking. So pattern thinking and strategic thinking isn't for everyone. And what most of our members came away from that session saying is, wow, where am I, first of all? And, can I do it? And then where are my people? And so you want to grow people, you want to develop people, you want to give people a chance. But there are times when you have to say, I think, we've reached a limit. And then, is there a way you can fully utilize with integrity that person in your organization? And if there is, awesome. Sometimes there isn't, and you have to let them go. Those are the hard decisions.
What I love the question you just asked there, or the questions that your CEOs were asking of like, where am I on this? Is there Ed used to talk about this as well, as like how far you can see over the horizon, and like, everybody has different levels, and this strategic thinking puts it like very succinctly. What questions should a CEO be asking themselves to figure out like how far they can see into the future, or can they see the system in action and figure out like what needs to be done from a strategic level?
So for me, what I use, I have some tools to help me and frameworks that help me to be able to listen and watch individuals and make an assessment as to where at least I think they may be. It's called the Leadership Circle is the one I use. There's lots of instruments out there, but the Leadership Circle I find to be the most powerful. And what it's really helping people to do is move from reactive leading to proactive or creative leading. And Bob Anderson, who created this instrument, very, very solidly built on a lot of adult development theory. Keegan's adult development model, which has been others have taken further, but started with him. And what he realized is 75% of all leaders are reactive. 75% of leadership behavior is reactive. It's responding to what's immediately in front of them. Only 25% is proactive or creative. And when you look at that, what's driving a lot of a reactive behavior? It's folks who are more concerned about what someone else thinks of me than about knowing what the right thing to do is and then going to do it. If you're spending a lot of time, what's the boss think? What's my neighbors think? What if everyone else thinks? It's being an other oriented in terms of what they all think. You're not going to be a strong leader. Yep. Leaders listen to all those people, get their input. They're focused on not what's best for me as a leader, but what's on best for other people, my shareholders, my employees, the society that we're serving. Strong leaders understand that, but they're very clear about here's our vision. That's where we're going. And they're very comfortable with that. They're very authentic with that. They're comfortable communicating that. And guess what? People see it immediately. And we all know when we're in with someone who's being real and authentic and when someone's giving us a line or they're, reading from a teleprompter. So people know that. I think intuitively we learn that at a young age when someone's real. And so strong leaders, proactive, creative leaders are clear about here's where we want to go, why we want to go there, how that benefits more than just me personally or the few of us. That's when people want to follow. People want to follow someone like that. And so, so I've got these little frameworks in my head that as I'm working with someone, I can tell pretty quickly if someone's kind of behaving that way. And guess what? They tend to lead their organization fairly rapidly to success, as opposed to someone else who's just constantly mired in what others think. And so anyway, I hope that answers a little bit in terms of, what does it take as a leader to be clear about this is where we're going. And by the way, people who are proactive and creative, they move beyond the notion of, win-lose, and they understand win-win. They understand it's not a zero-sum game, that you can make the pie bigger and share in it. They understand, and they have strategic thinking capability. They're able to see the whole, see the patterns and connections, and make sense of that, and articulate that to other people. I mean, any of the big names, right? Pick any of them that are on YouTube all the time. Jamie Dimon. I mean, how can this guy see the whole world, constantly taking that in and articulate it in the way that anybody can understand it? I mean, that's a gift. And there are few people who can do that as well as, people running those kinds of companies. A lot of your flag officers are like that. Yep. So it's an important, and yeah, can you learn it?
You're taking my next question, Rick. Can you learn it?
Yes, and what Bob calls it. So Bob calls the going from the reactive behaviors in this circle diagram to the proactive or creative behaviors. He calls it the hero's journey because it's a tough one, and it is for someone who is willing to be brave. And so why do I use that balcony analogy? You know, you and I go into the balcony to have a conversation as we watch you dance. It's all about self-awareness. And so one of the key skills and tools that someone can practice is becoming increasingly self-aware. And the best leaders are constantly aware of themselves and how they're interfacing with others all of the time in the moment. And the rest of us are, you know, like, oh, damn, why did I say it that way? I could have only said this, right? Or, boy, I wish I could take that back. Well, that's progress, because next time, hopefully that occurs to you before it comes out of your mouth. So a lot of the executive coaching is helping someone become more self-aware all of the time in the moment, and be able to respond in a way that is more proactive and less reactive. And that is something you can learn. And some folks, it's an easy skill to learn. For others, it's a harder skill to learn. But so that's what a lot of my executive coaching is it's that self-awareness. And we all have blind spots, and you know, and what is Vistage? It's a peer executive group. I mean, there's nothing more powerful than 12 other CEOs sitting around the table who have no agenda, because they're not competing with you. They have no agenda other than to help each other out, and they're going to call you out. Why the hell are you doing that? That doesn't make sense. And they're doing it in a caring way. They're doing it in a way that they're sincere, and that's what we all need. Because if you own the business and you're the CEO and you don't have anybody calling you out, oh my God. You know, we all need people calling us out.
I had the fortunate, unfortunate, but mostly fortunate reality of when Ed brought me into his group, I was both the youngest by probably 20 years. And at the same time, and we were the smallest. So we were probably like 2 or 3 million at that, or Hunt Killer, which was my last company. And I'm sitting around the table with, you know, 50, 60, I think even a 70-year-old who had retired while I was in the group, with massive businesses. And like I was like a fish out of water in that. I was always nervous, even when I had to talk, and for some reason my eye would always water. So even if I just had to give my monthly update, my eye would be watering. I'm like, guys, this isn't cool. But that push, it was like exponential professional growth sitting around that table with those other human beings.
Yeah. And we all learn. And it's, you know, as people hit their late 50s, 60s, 70s, you know, it's about giving back. It's about, you know, that growth and development of others. It's about the feel good you get from maybe having been there, done that, and being able to share some of that wisdom. And you know, as you experienced, you're a fool not to take advantage of it, right? So you know, it is fun to have, and all of our groups have a wonderful mix. My youngest CEO is 31, and my retired chair associate who comes to the meeting still is 70s, in his mid to late 70s, and that mix brings perspective. You know, I mean, we can talk about you know, the inflation of the late 70s because we were there, and what it means to manage a business through that. So that's valuable stuff.
And I always thought that I was the only one learning until someone pointed out, they're like, we're learning it as well. And because there's stuff that's happening today that like the younger generation is more plugged in and in tune to. And so it's just an incredible kind of cross-pollination of information.
AI. I mean, it's like, now this is embarrassing. Okay. So I do remember when PC came out, and I do remember when we got the first PCs in our offices. And, the paper company CEO is very active board member at GE. And, so we heard a lot of GE stuff. And one day, all the VPs got an Intel 386 chip computer in there. And I'm not making this up. They literally would go in, print out their emails, write the response on the email, hand them to their secretary. The secretary would go in and type the response of the email in. And that was the norm. And so we were in the paper business, so we were fine with that. But uh, one thing Welsh had done at GE, he said, you got to get yourself a 20-something's mentor. And that's what we did. And so we reversed mentored, and we brought in young people who were, had the computers all through college and were very, very comfortable with it, teaching our older folks more, how to use technology. And I'm there today. I mean, it's my kids and my associates who are much younger than I who are teaching me AI and all this social media stuff. And hopefully some of it sticks.
You talked about the proactive and creative leadership, and we talked a lot about how that's self-awareness. So instead of being reactive, we're being proactive, and we're being able to kind of get above the clouds and see what's happening, put pieces together, come back down, implement.
Yeah.
I think a lot about my last company. We'd go through ebbs and flows from a cash flow cycle standpoint, especially once we got into retail. Then just everything cash flow wise just fell off the face of the earth, because now we're getting paid late by vendors and everything else. And so there were these moments where, and by moments I mean like 6-month moments, where we were running this process called "What Will Kill Us Next," and it came from The Martian, because at the very end he says, when you're up there, you solve one problem, you solve the next, and if you solve enough problems, you get to come home. And so we kind of took a page from that book, but it was very reactive. It was like, what are all of our problems today, and then let's rack and stack them and figure them out. Is another part of this proactive creative leadership? Is it all about self-awareness, or is there any component to it? Like, you got to have the right team in the room, because otherwise, like, you're going to be solving everyone's problems.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the core set of behaviors in proactive leadership is building relationships. It's interacting with others, collaboration, teamwork, humility. So built into the model that I refer to, the leadership circle model, are behaviors that exemplify team leadership as opposed to me solving it all myself. And it doesn't mean that you're not clear, here's where we're going, and you're constantly reminding of people of that, but you're also doing it after having had many conversations with their input. And when you're doing your strategic plan, it's not the plan, right? It's the planning. It's the conversations that lead to the plan. That's the important stuff. People tend to support what they help create, right? And so it's the participation. But once we've all agreed this is it, now I'm the leader. My job to remind everybody, my job to hold myself and everyone around me accountable to what we agreed we're going to do, unless we need to have a conversation to change it, in which we can do that. But yes, you're right. It is really building a team. If you can, especially you're in those early growth, you're in that 5 and you're trying to get to 50 million range. That those folks, I say, hire somebody better and smarter than you and pay them more than you're paying yourself. Yeah. And the ones that do that are the ones that, and it takes off, and all of a sudden, they're hitting 50, 80, 100% revenue gains each year. And it's only because they got people around them that are incredible.
That might have been the second time I heard you say something like that in this conversation, of like the inflection point and bringing folks in. And it just reminds me, and it's probably somewhere between 10 and 15 million where we were able to like actually afford those types of folks.
Right.
And it was just it was a game changer. It's not to say there's always problems. Right. Up until the day that we sold, there were problems. But they're different problems.
They're different.
And you don't have to be so in the weeds on all the other stuff, and you can, not constantly, but more so often, be in strategic thinking and kind of working on the business. So,
well, and in Vistage we have Chief Executive Program, and we have a small business program. And really the difference partly is revenue, but more so than revenue. The small business program peer group is really for owner operators. $500,000 to maybe 3 million or 5 million. You could be an owner operator and have $12 or $15 million business, but it means you're spending a whole lot of time operating in their operations. It's a mindset thing. It's a choice. But when someone makes the choice to say, okay, I'm letting go of me as a operator, and I am going to focus on being an executive, to being a CEO. That's when we move them into the chief executive group. And the an easy example is healthcare, and physicians. And I've got a optometrist who is ready to stop doing eye checks and running a business. How do I take it from one successful practice to 12?
Yep.
Okay, that's a mindset shift. And now I'm not going to be so much of an optometrist. I'm going to be a CEO. And but that's a choice, and it's okay to be an owner operator, and you can live a very fulfilling and wealthy life, but it is a choice.
Do you see it more often that there's an inability to let it go? Because like when I think about that choice, like I would say we're in that like small business classification right now. We have big hopes, big dreams, and so we're doing our best to kind of work our way up. But obviously we need resources to be able to do those types of things. When I've seen the other side, like the other side is so much better. And I don't mean better from a money standpoint. I just mean like a stress, a problem solving, the quality of talent. When you say choice, like have they just not experienced the overall joy of just running a business from a CEO level? Or is it just like these are specialty skills that they just love being in X and that's it?
Yeah, great question. I think that for many people, they didn't know there's a choice. They don't know there's a choice. And for others, they're very aware. And one of the things when I'm speaking with a new prospective member, I can usually pick up quite quickly is whether they've worked in a major corporation or not. And in a big company, if you've been there for a while, you're going to know the difference between sales and marketing. You're going to know the difference between the corporate secretary and general counsel. You're going to understand what a matrix structure looks like and front back model, and how you can still have customer focus on the one end and yet the efficiencies of the back office on the other across many P&Ls. But if you've not been there and seen that, and your experience has been the business you're in, how is it you would be aware of functioning in a way other than a lot of time in the business? And so I think that's a huge part of what Vistage is bringing. I mean, I have those conversations with my members. More importantly, that's what they're listening for around the table. And so, particularly with some of our newer CEOs or presidents, to become CEOs, they're there because they want to know what that job's all about. I mean, now, I got to step into this role because I'm third generation or because I've been tapped by those who own the company to step into a role that maybe I'm not ready for. And what does it entail? And a lot of it is what we're talking about. It's seeing that bigger picture and understanding the difference between leading and executing towards a strategy and being in the weeds doing the work yourself.
Love it. Rick, this was an incredible conversation. I feel like
I've enjoyed it.
I feel like we could go a whole nother hour. Like I'd planned to take us into, some of the amazing growth that you've had over Vistage over the last 5 years. But we got lost in the culture sauce, and I thought that was awesome.
It's been wonderful. Great chatting with you. Glad to have another chat any other time. And I appreciate you listening. I mean, it helps when you have to articulate where you've been and where you're trying to go. So
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rick. Take care, and we'll chat soon.